So last night during the Bucks game, I tweeted out NBA trade machine for Giannis, and I was completely joking, but I got a lot of responses. And someone actually mentioned it would be fun to do trade machines on players that aren't actually going to get traded, like LeBron or James Harden. Just come up with like fake trades for players like that. I don't know if you guys would enjoy that, but let me know if you would. And right now, I don't have plans for a Giannis trade machine, but maybe at some point I will. Anyway, welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the Golden State Warriors, who, despite having the worst record in the entire league last year, look to be one of the best teams in the Western Conference for at least the next 2 seasons. In this video, we're going to be talking about kind of where they can go from here. They have a ton of options with plenty of assets and guys returning from injury next year, and it's going to be really interesting to see the direction that this team goes in, and we're going to talk about all those options in this video. But really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day, and leaving a like rating is a great way to let me know that you're enjoying the content, and it helps out the video a ton as well. With that said, let's go and get started. Okay, so this year's Warriors team is one of the more interesting developments that we've seen in the NBA in the last handful of years. They went from a finals appearance at a dynastic team to only getting 15 wins in a season, and it's probably going to end up making them much, much better in the future. And there are some teams along the way in NBA history that if they could have chosen before the season to have things work out the way they did this year for the Warriors, they probably would have, and they would have been better off for it. No team would ever actually intentionally, quote unquote, tank in the middle of what has been a really great run for the Warriors. If they were healthy, they would have been a playoff team, certainly in the West this year. But it just kind of worked out that way this year for the Warriors, and some unfortunate injury circumstances allowed for that to happen. But as I said, they're now armed with a ton of returning veterans from injury, plenty of extra assets potentially in a trade, and a championship culture, and they're definitely going to be a threat for at least the next 2 years. But of course, we got to talk about health first for this team, because if these guys aren't healthy, then nothing else really matters for this group. Obviously, Kevin Durant left. Draymond Green only played 43 games. Steph played just 5, and Klay Thompson is returning currently from a knee injury, so he did not play at all last year. And as I said, if those 3 guys aren't healthy, then things are going to change pretty quickly for this Warriors team. They have the highest payroll in the league next year, as well as the following, and they're going to be expecting to be competing. And if that's not the case, they're going to make some drastic moves. And there are some signs that these injuries are not just going to magically go away next season. Steph obviously had a couple of freak injuries this most recent season, but he's had injuries in the past. Klay is coming off the knee injury, as I mentioned, and Draymond started to break down a little bit this year as well, not just in terms of injuries, but in terms of his overall production, although obviously it was more difficult without Steph and Klay and KD on the floor. But all of these guys are also over 30 years old, and they've had a lot of wear and tear on their bodies as a result of all of those consecutive finals appearances and late postseason runs. So it's not unlikely that these injuries continue to be an issue, and this competitive team that we're expecting to see from them for the next 2 years never actually comes together. However, as I said, they are currently planning on competing for at least the next 2 years, assuming that everybody is healthy. The reason that I continue to say for the next 2 years is because that is the amount of years that they're going to have a ton of payroll already committed on this roster. They're at 148 for next year and 158 for the following year, and then the year after that, Steph's contract runs out, some other guys' contracts run out, and then that's probably when they're going to start to evaluate some things, assuming that they're not in a really great position to continue to compete 2 years from now. The core of this team is going to be much older, and they can probably run it back with those guys depending on their health, but that's when they're kind of really going to evaluate things. But on the other hand, even though that is an expensive roster, being in the luxury tax for next year as well as the following, they also have everybody signed long-term for the most part, with the exception of a couple of guys. So this is a group that's going to be able to come back next year, plus their rookie, assuming they keep him, and next year for the most part as well. So they're really well set up, as I continue to say, for these next 2 years. Now, the other positive that came out of this season, along with the draft pick stuff, is that they were able to develop some of the other players on the roster, guys like Eric Pascal. There are other players on this roster that are going to play a critical role on this team once everybody is fully healthy. They got some really good developmental minutes. They allowed their games to grow because they had so many more opportunities and responsibilities than they or the team expected them to have. And overall, I think that's going to be a positive for this team. So like I said, there are some teams that have, been in this dynasty type situation that would have preferred to have a season like the Warriors just had, even though it probably wasn't great for their fans, and the injury stuff is unfortunate. And of course, like, everything's going to start with Steph, Klay, Wiggins, Draymond Green, and Kevon Looney, but it's still nice to have those other guys kind of developing on the roster. But now as we get strictly to the offseason stuff, Andrew Wiggins is the guy that I really want to talk about here, because he has been a guy that's put up stats on a bad team, has never really won all that much in his NBA career, and is now in a perfect situation to kind of sink or swim in Golden State. He can either become that perfect complementary piece that they need, a guy that can score a little bit, can shoot off the ball, is a good defender, and kind of ties everything together for that group, or he can be an absolute zero that struggles to adjust. And if it's going to happen for Andrew Wiggins or for any player with a similar skill set to him, it would happen in Golden State. So I'm excited and interested and intrigued to see how all that works out for him, assuming he's on the roster for next season, because of course the opportunity is always there for the Warriors to make a big trade. They've got Wiggins to match any salary, plus a couple other guys they can throw in there if the salary is really high for whoever they're trading for, plus a top pick this year and the Timberwolves top 3 protected pick for next season that they got in the D'Angelo Russell trade. So that is always a looming threat for this team. 2 high draft picks plus salary to match it with Andrew Wiggins, and that is going to be a constant conversation with this group. And right now, I don't anticipate the Giannis thing being a thing right now to the Warriors, but maybe at some point that will change, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video. But regardless, if there's an opportunity to trade for a star, the Warriors are going to be up there in contention. Now the problem is, as I've mentioned in a couple of these videos, there aren't really that many stars out there that look like they're going to be traded right now, with Bradley Beal being at the top of that list at the moment, because so many of these guys are 2021 free agents. So it's difficult to find players to trade for either before or after the summer of 2021. And as a result of that, I think it's unlikely that we see any kind of huge trade this offseason from the Warriors. They're probably going to run it back, make sure their guys are healthy, see how Wiggins fits, more than likely pick someone like James Wiseman with the 2nd overall pick, develop him in the background, and try and compete with this roster while also developing the guys that are going to kind of be the next era of Warriors basketball. Because yeah, we can keep talking about trading for a star and things like that, but this team already has a ton of star power, and if they, keep their selection for this year and they make a top pick next year with that Timberwolves pick, they can really set themselves up well for the future while also being a really good team now. Now, they can obviously be a better team now by trading those players, but it's also not guaranteed that those top 3 guys that I mentioned in the beginning are going to remain healthy. And if you trade away these future assets to try and be good now, but those guys get hurt, you're kind of ruining the whole advantage that you have going here. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't trade for a star. I'm just saying that circumstances and context matter here, and we'll know a lot more about this team and about the health of those players once we get into next season. So I would imagine that there won't be anything huge happening this offseason unless something completely hits the fan with Giannis and he becomes available, because I think at that point the Warriors would try and make something happen, obviously, but more than likely they're going to get to at least the trade deadline before making any kind of big move and going from there. But the other thing to keep in mind here is if a big star does come available, the Warriors are not the only team with a ton of assets. The Pelicans and the Thunder arguably have better trade packages that they can offer. I don't even think it's arguable because of the amount of picks that they have at their disposal. So just because a star becomes available doesn't mean that the Warriors are going to be the team to bring that guy in. And as I continue to mention, cap space is an issue. It's non-existent for them, so it has to be via trade. But regardless of the path that they take, there are plenty of great options here in Golden State. They can run it back next year, draft and develop some younger players. They can trade for a star. They can play completely for the future if these guys get hurt and are injured. And regardless, they have the opportunity, if they play their cards right, to kind of be the next San Antonio Spurs, to set themselves up for that next era and to be really good now and to be good for the next 10 or so years, worst case, depending on how their draft picks develop. Is a fantastic situation to be in right now in Golden State. It's a front office that has shown that it knows what it's doing. It's a coaching staff that has shown that it knows what it's doing, and it has a championship culture there in Golden State. And whether that's with the current players or whoever they continue to build around moving forward, I would imagine that the Golden State Warriors are going to be a team at the top of the Western Conference, a consistent threat, a consistent presence within the top of the NBA world. And I think that they've set themselves fantastically up to be able to do that here moving forward. And I'm really, really excited to see what direction they decide to go in with all these assets and these opportunities that they do have. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.